Hello, and welcome to another episode of Breaking the Guard. We're in the year 2025 now, and I wanted to go back and recall some stories from my competition days that I feel might be of use to young competitors or just anybody who's interested in the thoughts going through a competitor's head. And I'm going to be picking a few matches that I have a particularly strong memory for, and they're both with BJJ Legend Saulo Ribeiro. The first time I went to compete with him was at the Arnold Classic, and this must have been like 2002 to maybe even 2001, really early in the game. It was the first time that I ever competed in the Arnold Classic, also the last time. It was winter, it was very cold, and I believe I came down with a flu or a cold or whatever it was because I was feverish the the day of the competition. I had the bad draw because I think I was still a relatively unknown quantity at the time. So I had pulled Saulo Ribeiro, who was the number one seed. I was, I guess, the 16th seed at the time. And I knew of his reputation. So he was already established as one of the greats. And I was starting to come up the ranks to make a name for myself. And I was extremely nervous. I think maybe only one other time that I've ever felt that nervous before a fight. I was worried about losing. I was worried how I was going to win. Um, my coach, not my brother, but Mike Cardoso, had given me intel, right? He's like, look, he's an incredible half guard sweeper. You know, you got to watch out for the half guard. You can't let this guy pull half guard on you. Whatever you do, you have to take him down before he pulls half guard. Otherwise, you're not going to get the points, and then you're going to be at a disadvantage. So I'm running through my head how I'm going to force this takedown, and at the same time, I'm worried about facing one of the best guys in the jiu-jitsu world while combating a fever and going through chills and whatnot. So not an ideal scenario. Nevertheless, step onto the mat, and once the match starts going, I feel good, right? Uh, but I do notice something that's off. As I'm trying to take him down, he's giving me really good sprawls, like very heavy sprawls. And I thought, it's weird that a guy who's like an all jiu-jitsu half guard guy has such a good defensive wrestling. And I couldn't get close on any of these shots. So while I'm trying to figure out a better setup for my takedown, which I thought was going to be a gimme, he ends up blasting me with a double leg and taking me down. And then I end up being put in my half guard. And now I'm like, okay, now I'm two down, 2-0, and I have to try to get my way up against one of the best guys in jiu-jitsu. And I'm having a really hard time making any space. Salo is all over me. And I don't think he was able to pass my guard. I could be wrong. If he did, it was briefly because I spent almost the entire round on my back and I just couldn't find a way to get up. And the whole time in my head, I'm thinking, what the hell happened here? And I thought this was going to be the reverse scenario. And I think within the last minute, I managed to get an underhook escape, get up to my feet. And then I was in desperation mode because I was down points and I needed to score a takedown to tie it up. So I started shooting a lot of wild shots. At one point, I shot in. He had a front headlock. And I did something that I wouldn't normally do, which is I tried to peek out from the front headlock, which is a bad idea. And he ended up capitalizing on that, sliding around the side, getting a rear naked choke, no hooks. And I remember eating the choke, and I was like, oh, damn it. And I tapped. And I think this was the second time in my career that I've tapped. I think I've only tapped 4 times. All to rear naked chokes, no hooks, by the way. It's the lion kill is definitely the king of the submission. That's the one that has always gotten me. Uh, but I remember after the match being upset with myself because I didn't like the fact that I tapped or that I got taken down and this whole game plan went completely awry. And the rest of the trip went poorly as well because I was competing alongside my brother and his ex-wife, and my brother ended up losing his first match, uh, and then his ex-wife ended up winning, but she was so sick as well that she couldn't continue, and and it was a real bummer because we had paid for the flight and all this, so like the prize money would have helped, and she would have probably won, to be honest, at the time. But it is what it is. So then we ended up just bailing, and it was just like a real like ugh of a trip. It just didn't go the way we wanted. But I learned a lot of things there. Like one, the amount of nervousness that I had against this opponent, even though he was great, I realized like it was overblown, right? And even though I was sick and feverish, it didn't really play a factor, honestly. Didn't. Like when it came to competition time, it all cleared out, right? And then afterwards, I didn't feel sick after either. Like it's like the competition helped clear it away. So uh, to me, the big problem was the intelligence was bad, right? It turns out that apparently he was training with Daryl Goller, who was a very well-known wrestler, and he was building up his wrestling game. And obviously, he had built up quite a bit. So I would have played a very different strategy if I knew I was going to go up against a guy who was actually wrestling versus just a pure jiu-jitsu guy, which at that point in my career, most of the guys I grappled didn't have any wrestling. They were all jiu-jitsu guys, so I was scoring takedowns very easily. So I didn't realize I was getting into a scrap. So that had set me back. But I remember being upset a lot about the tap. And my brother was telling me just to let go of it. And I was just really upset about tapping. Like, I'm like, man, I should have just kept fighting. And, if I went to sleep, I went to sleep. But I had something that changed my mind later, which was we're watching the women's final. And there was these two girls going at it. Uh, One of them drops a guillotine, gets in, and starts cranking it. And I was talking to somebody. I looked over, looked back, and I'm like, what happened here? Did someone throw a water bottle? Because I saw there was just like a giant pool underneath them both. And then the lady who had the guillotine starts freaking out, lets go of it, and pushes the girl off of her. And it turns out that she had choked the girl unconscious. And unfortunately for the girl on top, sometimes you lose control of your bowels, and she just completely emptied her bladder. So when I saw that, I'm like, you know what? It's probably a good thing that I tapped then. I'd rather that I tapped and had to deal with, the humility of having to been forced to tap than having to pee myself in public, and lay face down in a pool of my own urine, right? So like, yeah, there's worse things than that. So I'm glad I saw that early in. Even though I have gone to sleep, I never went to sleep just out of stubbornness, right? Like if I went unconscious doing a choke, it was because I was fighting it to the bitter end, and I just it never occurred to me to even tap, right? It wasn't like, oh, this is it, and I'm done, but I'm just gonna go to sleep anyways. I've never had that mindset. I think that would be kind of foolish. But that was that. Uh, we moved forward, maybe I think early or late 2005. I just finished competing, I think, in my first ADCC. Didn't go the way I wanted. I won my first match, lost my second one. Uh, and I was hungry for redemption. I go into a Grapples Quest Pro Division, Absolute. First match, Rafael Lovato Jr. And going into this, I wasn't doing well in a lot of ways. One, I had separated my AC joint on my left shoulder the week prior to the competition. I couldn't compete. I couldn't train. I was just on a bike because I couldn't even run because the movement of left and right was devastating. So I had to be on a stationary bike and just pedaling, And it was hard to make weight because I struggled. When the day of the weigh-in, I had to get on sweats and go running, put the plastics on, and it took me a bit to get the weight off. And it wasn't like I was super lean either. I felt like I was kind of sloppy because I wasn't able to train as much as I wanted to because of the injury. But I was still entering the competition. And I've heard of Lovato because he has done well. In fact, uh, by chance, at that same Arnold Classic I was in, he was in as well. He ended up facing Saulo Ribeiro in the finals, and he ended up losing to him. But they ended up creating a relationship after that point, and Saulo took on Lovato as one of his students, and that's why now you see that. Well, you don't see Saulo as much, but you see Zanji is in his corner quite a bit and helps train him because he became one of their students. And that was true in that case as well because they were both coaching. Well, no, they weren't coaching him yet, but they were friendly with him at that point, I believe. Because Mark Lehman at the time was coaching Lovato. Now, day of the competition, I go to compete. I feel in constant pain because of my shoulder. But whenever I've competed, I can't recall having an injury that I could consciously be aware of that hindered me because it kind of just all shuts off. I've always been able to perform when I had to, and I don't think anybody knew I was stepping into a match with an injury. Uh, so when people are like, "Oh, you're hurt this, you're hurt that," I feel the only real effect for me was not training the way I would want to train. At least with the extent of the injuries that I had, that which these were mostly minor, right? Um, well, not minor, but it wasn't like I couldn't move my arm. As I could, it's just in a lot of pain. But once you have the excitement and the adrenaline pump and all that, that all just goes away, and you wouldn't even know anything was wrong with me. But I go into that match. Lovato at this point, he is not what you see now, which right now he's a huge guy, really strong, big frame. At that point, he was like your typical jiu-jitsu guy in the old days, which is the long, lanky, no wrestling whatsoever. He was all guard. So he would pull guard, and I would work to try to pass. This was a weird rule set. It was like IBJJF mixed with ADCC. It was very strange, but I was scoring advantages, and I remember it was an 8-minute regulation round. I ended up scoring like 4 advantages. He had 2 advantages, and the match ended. So I raised my hand right away because I'm like, okay, I got this one in the bag. And without hesitation, they called for overtime. And I looked over at the ref's table and I'm like, what's going on? I had 4 advantages, he had 2. This is over. And I believe it was Kenny Florian who was the ref, and he had said, "Oh, it looks like the table lost track of the advantages." So I was like, "Well, my brother is filming. Let's look at the tape." And I said, "Oh, we can't do that." Like, what the hell is this? Like we have rules for a reason, and they made us go into overtime. And in all the genius of the overtime of this weird rule set was that uh, it's going to be the same rules. So I'm like, okay, fine. No, it gets weirder later. Right? So the overtime was just like a 2-minute round, same scoring system. I'm winning 2 advantages to 1. There's like 5 seconds left. I'm standing over Lovato trying to pass. He goes for like a ashi heel hook where I literally just spin. It never caught my heel or anything. And then the ref gives him an advantage. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. So now it's tied up, match ends. And now they go sudden death. In sudden death, first to score wins, advantages don't count. Mind you, we've done 10 minutes of grappling already. There's been 0 points on the board. Lovato's guard was very difficult to work against. Hard to pass because he was so flexible and so long. He wasn't able to really score anything on me either. So we were kind of at a stalemate. You know, I was only able to score advantages through like near passes, but he was always able to recover. And they would give him like submission advantages for just thinking about a submission. So we go into this overtime, and within the first 5 minutes of the overtime, I was able to get to north south. And I remember I got chest to chest. So, we're north south, my head's over, his chest, his stomach, and I'm chest to chest, and I'm holding him. And I'm counting out loud because I used this tactic against Henry Gracie because it was like a 5 second control time. And I think I got to like 7 seconds, and then Lovato recovered, and there was no points. At that moment, I ended up standing up and walking off the mats, and I go, "This is rigged. I'm not going to win this. They keep cheating. Like this should have been a score." And my brother is yelling at the referee. The referee's, arguing back. I think Brian Simmons was trying to negotiate something, and I was ready to be done. All right, I was fed up with what I felt was an unfair bias against me, and I then heard Lovato say something. "Oh, he's gonna give up. You're gonna win, Lovato." And if you've never heard Mark Lehman coaching, he's really annoying as a coach. Uh, so something about the tone of his voice really pissed me off. So then I just got back on the mat and I go, "You know what? Fuck this. If you want me to make a circus out of this show, I'll stay here all day long with Lovato, you know, and we'll just be here for 2 hours grappling." And I remember when I said that, I felt that Lovato shrank a little bit. Like he didn't look like he liked hearing that. Maybe he thought he was going to get the win because I was going to disqualify myself. But it looked like his spirit broke a little bit. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I felt. So they restart the match, and 40 minutes later, mind you, it's a 16-man tournament. So there's a right side of the bracket, left side of the bracket. The other side of the bracket is already on the finals, right? And they're just held up by our match. And Lovato, has pretty much been defending his guard the entire time. I'm attacking from the top the entire time, just not getting any closer to passing. So I think it was like 50, it was longer than 40, it was like 55 minutes or something, because at some point they stopped and they're like, "Okay, we need to change the rules." So they go, first advantage wins. So it's a point or advantage will win the match. Once they made that change, I ended up getting the first advantage pretty quickly because I was putting a lot of guard passing pressure. And I ended up winning the match at 58 minutes, which at that point in time was the longest grappling match, I think, in history. At that point, it's been passed, I think, by Keenan and Gordon, and by I think others now as well. I think the Who's Number One events or Who's Next had a much longer and much more boring match as well. And so it's a record I'll gladly give away. Uh, but I won that match. But now I had another match waiting, and I basically had about 5 minutes of rest before I had to go into this next match. And I remember just lying down and just feeling pain everywhere in my body. And even if I wasn't previously injured, a 58-minute match with someone like Lovato is not a lot of fun. It's brutal. Uh, but I got up. I'm like, all right, who's next? And it was this guy, Beto Arruda. I never heard of him. Black belt, Brazilian guy. And I remember I was actually losing that match in the beginning. I think he scored a takedown on me, or maybe he swept me. I don't know what happened, but I know I was down early. But I ended up making it back. Either I reversed him or took him down a couple times, and I ended up winning that match on points. So then I was on to the semifinals now, and that match was against Saulo Ribeiro. So this would have been the rematch, or this is the rematch that I have with Saulo. And this is a match that I really wanted. And I remember this was the reason I wanted to compete in this tournament, because I knew he was competing in it. Now, all the circumstances are kind of stacked against me. Uh, but I remember they gave me a little more rest in that one. I think I had like 10 minutes. So I'm lying down and just feeling all this pain going through me. And I'm just thinking to myself, I, I spoke to whoever was listening in my own head, right? And I just said, let me win this match. If you let me win this match, you can take my life. And I'll be fine with that. I just want to win this one. It means a lot to me. I just want to beat this guy. I'm willing to pay whatever price. You can take my life, strike me down with a thunderbolt. Just let me win this match against Saulo. And said that, and it hit me pretty hard because I didn't mean that trivially. I meant it. I was 100% serious. If there was a demon that would have had me sign a contract there, I probably would have signed it, right? Or not probably, I would have, because I wanted that win. And I remember getting up. Okay, it was my time to go. Got on the mats, and Saulo, I have no ill will towards him. He's a really good guy, and he actually came up to me and goes, "Hey, David, look, you're a warrior, man. Like, you don't have to do this, right?" But I was so amped up. I don't think I was that particularly kind to him at that moment. I was kind of just like short. I'm like, "No, I'm ready to go." And he's like, "Oh, okay." Um, and we had our match. He scored. Well, it was again. It was a weird rule set. It was kind of like ADCC rules mixed with IBJJF rules. So they scored him a takedown because he shot a single leg where I went to turtle, and then I think they took the points back because my brother contested it. Then he scored a guard pass, which I felt wasn't fair in my opinion, because I was kind of doing octopus guard before it was cool. Like, he got past, but I was around his hips, and then I managed to escape, and we got back up to our feet. But they scored him a guard pass for that. So now I was down 3-0. He shot it again. I scored my best move on him, which was a lateral drop. But unfortunately, because ADCC rules, it didn't score. So I ended up getting on top of him in his guard. But it was short time, wasn't finding anything. So he managed to scramble back up to his feet. He ended up shooting, or I think I ended up shooting on him. He got a guillotine. I ended up having to flip over. He got like almost like a mounted guillotine, I think, and I was just defending the guillotine until the match ended, which was like a few seconds left. So I ended up losing by that guard pass, and I didn't have any shame in it though. That match, I poured it all out. I did everything I could to win. Didn't win, and he was gracious in victory. I got off the mats. I laid down, and remember the first thought was like, "Why didn't you let me die?" And I was ready to, and I just really wanted that win. And I'm not saying that's a good headspace. I don't think it particularly was, but that was the space I was in at that time. That I was very willing to die to win something which, mind you, wasn't going to change my life financially, right? I believe the prize money was $1,000. And mind you, after beating Saulo, if I would have beat him, I would have to then go against Zanji next. And Zanji was heavyweight Zanji. It would have been a rough, it would have been a hell of a bracket to win, right? Especially after that ordeal I had gone through. And I had to pay my own flight and everything else. So I would have maybe made like $200 profit at the end of the day. So not a financial victory. It was just about honor. It meant something more than the medals and the trophies, right? Or the fame. But I got over it. And I remember afterwards, it was very nice of Saulo. He gave me his training gear. What the gear that he competed in, right? Which was his rash guard and his board shorts. And I guess it's Japanese custom to do that to honor an opponent. Uh, I thought that was really cool. No one has ever done that to this day that I've competed with, and I still have it with me somewhere in my closet. Although at the time, I thought it was a little funny because she's like, "Oh, here," I'm like, "That's very gracious of you," and then I'm like, "It's completely soaked in my sweat and your sweat, and whatever else is in here, like probably better in the laundry." If you'd have given me clean first, but the spirit of it was really nice, and I still have those things, um, and I still have the memory of all of these events and look back and see the kind of changes in the psychology that I had, where my earlier matches, I was so wanting to prove myself that I was willing to do anything to do that, and willing to sacrifice life and body and injury and whatnot. And I feel that's like a defeatist attitude in a way where I forgot where I heard this. I know it was some podcast. Uh, I can't recall it, but a lot of people, when they talk about something that they love or something that they believe in, they always talk about what they're willing to sacrifice as far as like, oh, I'm willing to die for this. I'm willing to do this for this. But it's always something that you are losing. And this gentleman, I think um, it was about the black suffrage movement or whatnot. And he was saying like the problem is too many people are willing to die. There's not enough people willing to kill. And what he meant by that was it's not like I have to become a martyr in order to accomplish my goals, right? Because I'm already succumbing to defeat, basically, and hoping that my sacrifice will pay for somebody else. Whereas the attitude I should be having is that I'm willing to destroy anything in my path. Like that's a different type of price to pay, but I'm willing to kill to defend what's mine or to protect what I believe in. And when I heard it phrased that way, I'm like, that's a lot better. That's a lot better, right? Like, I'd rather still be alive, right? And, not leave behind people that could have used my services and, my love and my support versus, dying some type of hero's death, right? No, I'll be the guy that lives. So I think uh, it's better to have something to live for than something to die for, right? And that's kind of my takeaway from this a bit. Whereas I was so willing to die for so many things, like no, I'm. That kind of shows that I don't really have a lot to live for. Honestly, I feel like, in a way, I'd rather be so motivated to succeed that I'm gonna find impossible paths to victory, and stay on top. Anyhow, that's a few stories of my grappling and just the mindset I had going into it. Hopefully that's entertaining for some of you. Maybe it gives you a little bit of insight into some of the earlier days. Again, this was back in the early 2000s when I was competing. There wasn't a lot of sports psychology going on back then. I think now people are a little bit better prepped, although not fully to be honest, but at least the information is out there now. It wasn't really out there back then. The only book I was armed with, which mind you was a great book, was Wrestle to Win by Beasley Hendricks. Unfortunately, I believe it's out of print, but it was a really good simple book that set up a lot of my foundation for sports psychology and what I used for a lot of my competitions. But uh, a book that my brother wrote, which is also available on video form on my website, davidandmaria.com, Black Belt Psychology, it captures all those things that was in that book, but a lot more, and it's specifically tailored towards combat sports. So uh, if you could read both, read both. If you can't, I'm gonna be biased towards my brother because it's a book that we also had all of our fighters read, and of our new generation fighters, and they've all had such a great spirit that I feel like that's a big part of it. So, a little endorsement there for Black Belt Psychology. It's available at davidandmaria.com on a video format as well. That's all I got for you guys this week. I will see you all next week.